the perfect time to hear from Rachel, because Rachel Kitchin, the fossil-free fashion campaigner at Stand.earth, is an organization that delivers large-scale solutions to climate and environmental problems all over the world. And Rachel campaigns to raise the bar on corporate leadership on decarbonizing the fashion industry. And in the past year, we have seen an explosion in large companies announcing net zero commitments. So if you listen to the brands, we're all going to be fine. But until now, unfortunately, the net zero plans have been a wild west of promises, many from brands looking for a quick PR win, like we saw, and with a really no plan at all to transition off fossil fuels. Stand.earth said during COP27 that the fashion industry has an extra large role to play in the decarbonization agenda. But so far its action have been a disappointing extra small. And in the analysis pre-COP, you find that 8 out of 10 of fashion biggest and most influential brands are still increasing their supply chain emissions. Only just a year after committing to slash the emission in half by 2030. And one case that, Rachel, you're going to talk about is like athleisure giant Lululemon, for example. Their emissions are heading in the complete opposite direction, jumping by more than 60% in the past year. So, Rachel, I'm sure you have a lot to add to this conversation and to show what is happening at a political and climate agenda.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, so I just kind of wanted to take this opportunity to broaden this out, because, you know, as we've had fossil fuel derived fabrics, we've had all that plastics and like the enormous impact that they're having on our bodies, on the climate. But as George mentioned, fossil fuels are really deeply embedded throughout the value chain, and this image is kind of just a little look at how fossil fuels are there at every kind of step in the chain. And we've looked at kind of the fabric and the material production. And I really want to now kind of focus on manufacturing, where a huge amount of the emissions are embedded. So, you know, the vast majority of manufacturing, as we know, takes place in countries in the global south, mostly in Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia. And during this stage, there are highly energy intensive processes going on, which right now are achieved using a combination of coal or other fossil fuels burned on site, and lots of electricity brought in from grid systems, which are still heavily fossil fuel dependent. So that means lots of emissions, lots of air pollution, both in communities that are already deeply impacted by climate change. And, you know, yes, decarbonizing the manufacturing process is maybe not really like the sexy part of sustainability, but it is essential. If we just take carbon emissions as our vector, the World Resources Institute and AII did some really great research which found that transitioning fashion supply chains to renewable energy alone would cut the sector's emissions by around 27%. So we know that the industry, and in fact, every industry actually has to cut emissions in half by 2030 to keep that 1.5 dream alive. And fashion's impact is one of the biggest out there. So this is a huge piece of the puzzle. Stan's fossil-free fashion campaign, as Livia mentioned, we were working to kind of try and raise the bar on sector ambition, to try and identify brands that can be leaders in this space, leaders in this race to decarbonize. But you know, we also have a campaign which, if I can skip to the next slide, is focused on the Canadian athleisure brand Lululemon, who for us kind of encapsulates these issues. They are almost entirely using fossil fuel derived fabrics. We've already had seen that in the Synthetics Anonymous report. Their manufacturing is largely based in Vietnam, Bangladesh, and they're extremely fast growing. And with that growth comes more energy demand, more emissions, unless they act now to decarbonize that. And as Livia mentioned, our little piece of research found that Lululemon's emissions were the fastest growing of all of the brands that we looked at. So yes, I mean, the good news, if you like, is that sector-wide ambition does seem to be going up. You know, we're seeing lots of examples of brand commitments coming in all the time. The Fashion Charter, which has more than 100 companies signed up now, raised its commitment level at COP26 a year or so ago. And yet, the fact remains that in most brands, emissions are not going down. In fact, they are still going up. So yes, we had a little piece of analysis out before COP27 last year, which is a full year after the new charter commitments. And we found that the vast majority of the brands, which were all charter members, were not just not going down, but were actually heading in the wrong direction. So I guess the question is, like, what is happening here? How can climate ambition be increasing at the same time as climate impact? And this is where, for us, the devil is really in the detail. We need a way to tell whose commitments are worth the time and space that they take up, and who's more in line with Boohoo announcing a Kardashian as a sustainability ambassador. So we have help. At COP27, the UN's high-level expert group produced some really great guidance, which is very much actually in line with what we would like to see from brands. And I mean, for me, all commitments should be judged against this criteria. And I'm just going to pull out a few highlights that are important because there's quite a lot of them. One is offsets, none of them. Emissions reductions have to be absolute and not just kind of cancelled out by buying offsets, fancy accounting. The other is that we need to reach into the supply chain, all the way into the value chain with no exclusions. We know that 90% more, often more, of a brand's emissions are in the supply chain outside of their direct operations. So this piece is absolutely essential. And with it comes the energy transition. So that means brands need to be committing to renewable energy, not just in their own operations, but throughout their supply chain, and supporting and aiding that transition to help drive a renewable energy transition that extends beyond just the fashion sector. And they need to be transparent. They need to be setting baselines and reporting against those targets so that accusations of greenwashing don't fly. We need to be accountable and have the opportunity to hold brands accountable for their promises. So we took a little bit of a time to analyze a few of the existing commitments in the industry against these guidelines. We found some trends emerging, the biggest being that no one was really meeting these standards. This isn't, the most comprehensive research. We took like a little snapshot of 10 top brands. We found H&M and Kering kind of came close. This is just one section based on net zero ambition. But overall, some kind of key themes were that emissions targets were not reaching deep enough into the supply chain. We weren't seeing the same level of ambition in the supply chain as we need to see and as we were seeing in their own operations. And that's kind of a key potential space for greenwashing. We also found that renewable energy is almost entirely absent from supply chain commitments. And there's a large implementation gap when it comes to that fossil fuel phase out in the supply chain. And then we also found that a lot of brands are failing to provide that key supply chain transparency, essential, as I mentioned, for holding them accountable. So kind of just to leave you something positive, I think the theme here is that we are seeing movement, we're seeing growth and ambition, and we know where that ambition needs to take us. What we're looking for now is progress. So Stand.earth also produces a scorecard, our fossil-free fashion scorecard, where we look closely at these decarbonization issues, as well as some kind of the role that circularity has to play in that. Our next scorecard is coming out in March, where we will be doing a much deeper dive on where that implementation is at this point in time, who's kind of moving the dial, really moving the dial in the right direction. So to keep a lookout for that too. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. I mean, it's absolutely true, as you showed us, every industry needs to cut emissions in half, but fashion is moving in the opposite direction. You said, and Erska reminded us that consumption of clothes has grown faster than population or GDP. So there is a lot of confusion, which is fueled by a lot of greenwashing that you're also